Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Rocko's Modern Life, Static Cling. Now, this is, of course, the kind of reunion sort of TV special kind of thing of Rocko's Modern Life, and it had been delayed for a while, and now it is finally out. And I was a kid who grew up with Rocko. I think I remember when it premiered. I definitely watched it when it was a new cartoon, and it was a show I really loved. So I was very happy to see this special finally come out. And it's an interesting special in the case that it is very self-aware and is pretty much talking about itself. I think you have a lot of these reunion things like calling things out and kind of like acting like they can't not mention things. What Static Cling does is it kind of gets into the discussion of, well, what Rocko was talking about was the modern life at the time, so shouldn't a Rocko's Modern Life now be more like this, while also acknowledging things have changed since the 90s, and how a lot of that humor, even though the very ironic 90s sense that was very much a part of Rocko's Modern Life, how it could kind of work in the modern day. And I think that really worked for this special because it really thought about what you would do with Rocko's Modern Life. This feels like both like just another kind of episode. It feels like I've watched an episode of Rocko's Modern Life I somehow missed or something, but it also feels like very current, which is, this special makes feel a lot like easier than it probably was, because most people like don't do that. When you see the reunion thing, you're really into it, and then later you're like, whatever. But this, like, I've seen a few episodes sort of recently, and this just felt like yet another episode. Certainly it's more of like references to past episodes and like things in the background, and there's a lot going on. I'm not going to say there isn't, but it does feel like, another kind of Rocko adventure. Even though they've been away from it, I thought that was kind of the most surprising thing about it. I actually liked how they did the transgender plot line. I haven't heard much negative about that, but I think it was a cool idea because that was obviously something you could read into with the relationship between Ed Bighead and Ralph Bighead, which I think represented more than just, one, Ralph wanted to be a cartoonist and his dad didn't want him to, and obviously took something that was just kind of tense that you could read into and go, maybe that's about this thing because he's gay, maybe it's about this argument they would have or something like that, rather than just animation, because obviously he's a successful animator, so maybe he wouldn't mind. But you could, I think viewers at the time could take those plot lines and read into them, since there was such very little representation, kind of just like take that little kind of like breadcrumb and make it represent a lot more. And this kind of takes on that and makes it, instead of like a subtext, makes it the text basically. I don't think they were really kind of trying to do that with the character of Ralph, who now transition to Rachel. I always thought that represented more, even at the time, than just like their dad didn't like that they were an artist or an animator. Although I think that was going on too, and I think that's maybe what they were in effect talking about. But at the time I was a kid and I understood like X-Men wasn't just that they're superpowered mutants, that there was a subtext to it, and I thought that plot line did as well. So I think this kind of like is an easy thing to change that plot line, sort of. I mean, I don't think it feels like you change it. It feels like a natural kind of progression, to be honest, which I think is why that plot line works so well. And they don't fully like acknowledge it ultimately that much, other than the fact that like times have changed and people changed in 20 years in ways you didn't expect and ways you did expect. And I think that's kind of showing one of the ways that people do change. There's people you thought were very much straight or this sort of a way or this sort of a personality, and they realized they weren't really that happy, and then they sort of transform and blossom and become a lot happier. And I think the character of Rachel represents that. You will find like in 10-20 years you haven't seen someone and you'll be like, holy shit, like, it might be that they lost weight or something, but it might be something that's obviously a little more dramatic. But I liked how they used that plotline. It's kind of like taking like a germ of an idea and going like, what are the other ways they can do it? I understand they had a GLAAD representative look at the script and make sure it was appropriate and everything like that, and I think they did a good job with that. But honestly, if they did or didn't, it didn't feel like that. It just felt like a natural way the show was, which I think is honestly maybe the best way you can do something like that. What is interesting, so this is called Static Cling. At first I was like, well, that's sort of a dumb title. Like, why don't you just call it Rocko's Modern Life TV special or something? Like, doesn't really matter. But I think what they're talking about is basically the static cling of what was Rocko used to be on, and that was more of an analog TV. Rocko's like pre-digital for the most part. You might have watched it on digital TV, past its premiere date, but at the time there was Rocko, there was still static. And I think it's static cling is saying like we're clinging onto nostalgia. Get it? Haha. And in a lot of ways, this is really about like you're clinging onto it, how much money there is to it, how good it is to revisit the past and re-examine things and confront issues that were there. Its kind of overall thesis makes for a really good special, and I think this is really good. But one of my kind of qualms with it, which isn't a problem I necessarily have with the special, I think the special is fine, but I think as a Rocko kind of thing, it's not very Rocko focused. Like, he really wants his show back. Part of me is like, this is definitely like topper tier Rocko episode, but some of my more favorite Rocko episodes are more centered around him specifically as a character. This was not that story, so getting mad at it or getting upset or criticizing it for not being that story is a little stupid, because that's not what it is, and that's not really what criticism should be. But I still kind of found that interesting that we're looking at Rocko's modern life, and I think in terms of the story, he's like third tier or something like that. And that's a little ambitious, and it's interesting that they got away with it to such a degree, because I think a lot of people will be like, oh, so it's going to be about the Bigheads and the show and like all this other stuff, and like Heifer and Filbert are kind of going to be background characters to this other plot line. But at the same time, I think certainly you have to look at a creator and not have them just have all these people just to have these people in an unnatural progression. I think when you look at something like Force Awakens and you sort of made Han Solo become old Han Solo, that felt very unnatural. That movie sort of works with it in whatever reason, but I don't think it feels as at home as if you had him age and kind of become a different person over that time. When we're looking at Static Cling, I think the cool thing about it is they found like what would be the natural progression with this storyline and with these characters, and what should we actually focus on. And Rocko's Modern Life nails that so well. It's honestly one of the better reunions, sort of. I don't really think it's a reboot, but I guess it sort of is, kind of. It's one of the better ones I've seen in a long time, because it just feels at home with the rest of that stuff. I think that's so cool. Like they definitely nailed it, but it feels like they never lost that attitude and that reasoning. Like they haven't changed since that time or something, but they also have changed. It's interesting. It's like they have this whole thing about the winds of change, and it's such a big factor into this special. But I think if anything, it's like this feels at home with everything else while also acknowledging the changing world, which is not an easy thing to do. And I think Rocko's Modern Life Static Cling really absolutely nailed it. It made me, cling on to my nostalgia while also realizing what was so great about the thing I was nostalgic for, which I think is something that a lot of specials never really are able to do as well as Rocko's Modern Life did. So if you have seen Rocko's Modern Life Static Cling and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.